Cami. Buenas tardes a todos, muchas gracias por venir. Bienvenidos a esta aula magna de la Facultad de Medicina y Odontología. Y es para mí un placer presentaros al profesor Dickenson. Ahora, en primer lugar, toma la palabra el profesor Lanuza, director del Máster de Neurociencias de la Universidad de Valencia. Profesor Lanuza.
Muchas gracias, señor decano. Pues, Professor Dickinson, it's a pleasure to welcome you here, and I really want to thank you for coming to give a talk for our neuroscience master and for the rest of the academic community which has come to join us today. I'm sure that your talk will be enrichment for our seminar cycle, so thank you very much.
Bien, y a continuación, para presentar al profesor Dickenson, tiene la palabra el profesor Alfonso Valverde del Departamento de Medicina de la Facultad.
Well, thank you, Professor Lanuza. Thank you, Professor Bayardo. Professor Dickenson, before I introduce you, please allow me a few words in Spanish to thank everybody's collaboration and who had made your visit possible. Bueno, empezaré agradeciendo, seré breve, seguro, a las dos personas que tenéis junto al profesor Dickenson, el profesor Lanuza, empezando por el que tenemos más a nuestra izquierda, el director del Máster de Neurociencias Básicas y Aplicadas, que, entre otras cosas, ha permitido que esté aquí el profesor Dickenson dentro del ciclo Comunicar las Neurociencias. Y bueno, yo quiero agradecerle toda la ayuda, toda su colaboración. Es un caso un poco extraño, en fin, de un excelente investigador. Podéis poner su nombre y veréis cómo tiene un montón de publicaciones. Es también muy buen docente y, curiosamente, eso no le impide ser una bellísima persona. Es una cosa curiosa. Personalmente nos une, más allá del hecho de que sea el director del máster, la LRU, la ley que había antes de la LOU, que es lo que conocéis vosotros, se cruzó nuestros caminos, y a partir de ahí, pues bueno, para mí es un verdadero placer considerarte mi amigo. Y del profesor Bayardo también agradecerle, porque bueno, estamos en la sede que él preside, que es la Facultad de Medicina, ¿de acuerdo? Realmente yo digo el profesor Bayardo e inmediatamente me viene a la cabeza su padre, que la verdad es que le dejó el listón bastante alto, fue realmente mi profesor, no el profesor Bayardo que vosotros conocéis. Y la verdad es que bueno, también es un caso extraño de persona que bueno, no solo ha hecho honor a su apellido, sino que también tenía una rara habilidad, y era que veía a los becarios de otros departamentos y eso le permitía incluso saludarlos. Solo había dos personas en aquella época que me vieran, uno era nuestro actual decano y otro, bueno, profesor del Departamento de Bioquímica, el profesor Guillermo Saez. Y esas cosas, pues, uno no las olvida cuando pasa de becario por diferentes caminos y cruza sus vidas. Muchas gracias, señor decano, por habernos prestado esta sede tan magnífica, ¿no? Y bueno, tendría que, en fin, continuar agradeciendo a un montón de gente que veo por aquí. Cuanto más próximos a mí, tanto de mi familia como de mi departamento, pues más han padecido organizar esto, que diré, ¿organizar el qué? Pero si total viene aquí un señor a contarnos, bueno, pues, en fin, le podéis preguntar a los que han estado cerca de mí y que me han tenido que soportar. Bueno, y realmente no voy a nombrarlos por no dejarme a nadie, pero bueno, los podéis ver más o menos por aquí a todos ellos. Y ya acabaré estos agradecimientos agradeciendo a realmente los que a mí más me importa que hayáis venido, que sois vosotros. Si no hubierais venido no tendría sentido haber organizado todo esto. Realmente para que el profesor Dickenson le cuente la charla a los 4 o 5 del departamento, pues no. Así que os agradezco tremendamente que hayáis venido, que casi hemos llenado el aula magna, que había por ahí apuestas a ver. Así que, en fin, muchísimas gracias. And now, please allow me to introduce you to Professor Anthony Dickenson. Anthony Dickenson is Professor of Neuropharmacology in the Department of Neuroscience, Physiology and Pharmacology at the University College London. United Kingdom. He gained his PhD at the National Institute for Medical Research in London. He has held posts in Paris, California, Sweden. His research interests are pharmacology of the brain, including the mechanism of pain and how pain can be controlled in both normal and pathophysiological conditions. And more important, how to translate basic science to the patient. Professor Dickenson is an honorary member of the British Pain Society, was a member of the Council in the International Session for the Study of Pain for 6 years, is section, in the present section editor for the journal Pain. Well, he has authored more than 340 referred publications and has an age index of 90. 90, when you have time to check about age index. All due to his motivated and brilliant research team. Without a team, it's not possible. He has founded and continued member to the Wellcome Trust funded London Pain Consortium. He has given plenary lectures at the World Congress of Pain, the American Pain Society, the European Congress, the Canadian Pain Society. It's all the countries. I know that Spain is not in this list, but well, and now at the University of Valencia. And for me also important, he has also spoken at the Royal Institution to general practitioners and schools on pain, children. Well, as you can see from this summary of his professional career, his curriculum vitae is simply impressive, overwhelming, I would say. A curriculum vitae, however, that contrasts with the closeness, accessibility, naturalness, humbleness that he transmits, I can promise you. A common friend of Professor Dickenson and mine, Professor Juan Antonio Micó, Professor of Pharmacology in the University of Cádiz, who was here last December, said me, science is Jules Snell's if it's not transmitted. And transmitting is not just publishing, it's telling young people about your doubts and beliefs. This was precisely why Professor Dickenson accepted our invitation, precisely why he is here today, and precisely why I'm so proud to be here with him. Many thanks, Tony. Welcome to my university, it's my second home. And I hope that you have enjoyed the city of Valencia as much as I'm sure we are going to enjoy your conference. Thank you very much.
So, buenas tardes. Thank you all for coming along this afternoon. Thank you to Alfonso for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for the invitation. I've been to many parts of Spain. This is my first time in Valencia, and I'm so impressed by your city, so impressed by your university. So, this is the title of my talk, What Makes Up the Pain Experience. And so, the aim of this is to talk about what we know about pain and to go on into the future and see where we might be. And so the summary of the talk is up here. For all of you, many of you are starting your studies, knowledge is power. So those of you who will become medical students, you will have thousands of patients coming to see you when you're practicing. They won't self-diagnose, they will tell you they have pain. It's the most common symptom of many medical disorders. And for those of you doing neuroscience or pharmacology or physiotherapy, you will come across pain many times in the future. And so the most important thing is, unfortunately, I cannot speak Spanish, there is no simultaneous translation, but the translation we need to do in science is from the basic science, the laboratory science, through to the patient. And that translation requires a conversation, a dialogue between the science and the clinicians. And that's something we've been very interested in. And I want to talk about some new targets, and at the end, talk about how we might be able to start predicting which patient will respond to which analgesic drug. Because most of medicine is you have a patient, you make a diagnosis, you give a treatment, and you don't know what treatment to give. And you try it for months, and then it doesn't work, so you start another one, and all the time the pain is becoming chronic, the patient is getting more depressed and more anxious, and so to be able to predict who responds to analgesics is going to be a very powerful way into the future. But I have one question for you. This is not a test, an examination. Who is in pain at the moment, out of you guys? 1, 2. Well, either you're very brave, maybe the male's very machismo, you have no pain at all. But something is wrong, because the reason is that you're young and you're healthy. But in every country in the world, when you take a survey of the general population, 15%, 15% of the population have pain. And this is not just a short-lasting pain, this is a persistent chronic pain. And so it's a huge medical problem. So where do we start? So this is a way of doing science that we like, electrophysiology. So you can go in an animal, you can anesthetize them, and record from sensory neurons in the spinal cord. And what these neurons do is something beautiful. They tell you exactly the stimulus that you apply. So brush, these are mechanical forces, and as it goes from touch to pain, the responses become greater. You can look at cooling, painful cold, warm, hot, painful heat. And these neurons code the stimulus. And these are in the spinal cord, where inputs from the body have to synapse before they go on to the brain. So this is an animal, under anesthesia. And for any of you who are going to be surgeons or anesthesiologists, pain is not suppressed by general anesthetics. The perception is that pathways are active. So this is the neurons in animals. But now you can use the same stimulus. If you take a laser, it is a pure heat stimulus. So a laser produces heat and nothing else. And when you take some volunteers, students in London, just like you guys, and you ask them, do you perceive pain? No. And you go up, you increase the heat, and you increase it more, they start describing burning pain, because heat, that's what it is. You can measure the cortical activity with EEGs and see a response to that. You can see a beautiful increase in the intensity of the perception, so warm to painful, more and more reports of pain, the latency changes, and now you can do something interesting. We have the whole of the central nervous system involved, inputs into the spinal cord, ascending to the sensory cortex, pathways returning back to the spinal cord. That is what pain is for each of us as humans. The whole of the nervous system is involved. So those reports from those volunteers is the whole brain. But what you can do is plot a graph of the action potentials in the animals to the pain report in the volunteers. So as the number goes up, it's more and more painful. And it's the same stimulus. And what you see is an absolutely identical response. So activity in an anesthetized rat spinal cord, human perception, and it's identical. So we're all mammals, and that's the reason for this. So the sensory pathways we have for pain appear to be exactly the same in any mammal. And so we should be able to go from animal studies of mechanisms and translate that into human pain in patients. And that's what we're going to try and do. So the first important point that, unfortunately, most primary care, most general practitioners in Europe don't accept is that there are different pains. So nociceptive pain is caused by damage to tissue, very often inflammation, And because when tissue is damaged, we have chemicals released. This is a chemical activation of our pain sensors. And osteoarthritis is the most common form of this. So, damage to tissue. And surgeons cause a lot of this. All surgery will damage tissue, so post-surgical pain in the short term is tissue damage as well. But we have nerves. And if we have a lesion or a disease of the nervous system, peripheral or central, we have damage to nerves. The tissue is normal. The nerves are the problem. So it's a problem of the ion channels and the electrical events in these nerves. So it's completely different. And those pains get transmitted on into the brain, and each of us builds up our own personal perception. But there are pains where we have both tissue and nerve damage. Low back pain, which is the most common form of pain in terms of unemployment. Most people who can't work have back pain. And cancer pain, which of course is a huge problem because the treatment of cancer is getting better and better. Patients are surviving cancer, but they still have pain. And these are combinations of the two. And then other pains where tissue damage is normal, nerve damage is not there, and these might be things like fibromyalgia and some other pain conditions where the problem is not the body, it's probably processing within the brain. So we have these different types of pain. So what have we got? Well, acute pain is simply activation of our pain sensors. It's a simple message going to the brain, and the minute the stimulus stops, the pain goes away. If we have tissue damage, we have the chemical mediators which sensitize the peripheral nerve fibers and equally sensitize the spinal cord. But this is a very different process from neuropathic pain, where tissue is normal, but nerves are damaged. They send abnormal electrical events, but also produce central sensitization. So one very important point is that out in the body, the originating processes of pain are different, but once we're in the nervous system, the spinal cord and the brain, we see much more common mechanisms, this central sensitization. So we're going to go on a journey from the periphery through to the brain and back down again. And this is the example of cancer pain. And this is interesting because patients with cancer are fragile, they have multiple problems, multiple treatments, and the cancer can change with time. And we have very little clinical data on cancer pain. And so the animal models become important. And we have inflammation, we can have breakdown of the bone as a secondary cancer grows within the bone. This is all tissue damage, but we can have the tumour compressing, stretching nerves and causing nerve damage as well. And so cancer pain, just like low back pain, is a combination of these different sorts of pain. So, the Holy Grail. There is a church in Valencia with a chalice, which is meant to represent this, but the Holy Grail was the search for the solution to everything. And the simple solution for pain would be to stop it out here in the periphery before it enters the spinal cord and goes to the brain, because once we're here, we have 100 million neurons, and that's a lot of problems. So, what might it be? Well, if we have tissue damage here, we have chemicals like prostaglandins, bradykinin, ATP, that are activating receptors, but this is chemical transmission. And if we have neuropathy, the problem is within the electrical events in the nerve. That's ion channels, so sodium, potassium, and calcium channels are abnormal. So if we're going to stop pain where it starts, we have paracetamol, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, aspirin, the non-steroidals that work on the prostaglandins. They would work in tissue damage pain, but they'll be entirely ineffective with neuropathic pain. And we have other drugs like lidocaine and gabapentin that work on ion channels, and they're appropriate for neuropathic pains. So anybody treating pain has to be able to distinguish these in terms of the periphery. The chemical activation, the neuropathic pain with the electrical events. And most GPs in Europe get this wrong. And so patients may be on a course of non-steroidals for a neuropathic pain, they're never going to work, and the pain becomes chronic as the patient is being treated with something ineffective. And so knowledge is power, we need to educate. So going back to inflammation, you all know about the prostaglandins, these enzymes, the cyclooxygenase enzymes, and the non-steroidal drugs block these enzymes, prevent production of these prostaglandins, and prevent the sensitization and activation of pain fibers that conducts electrical events to the nervous system. And these drugs work very well. If you have a headache, a minor injury, a period pain, they're fine. But with a severe pain, they're not good enough. And the problem is all these other chemicals that are released in the damaged tissue that these compounds don't change. So where might we go into the future? If you remember anything about this lecture tonight or tomorrow or even next week, it's because you have a nervous system that is connected up properly. All those billions of neurons are in the right place and they're talking to each other. And that happened because of nerve growth factor. So in embryonic and fetal and early life, there are high levels of this growth factor and it guides neurons to the correct destination. But once maybe your kind of age, for most of you, 21, 22, we're connected properly, we don't need it, until tissue is damaged. And then it is upregulated. It works on mast cells to do with inflammation, it works on the autonomic nervous system, and it works on pain fibers. So nerve growth factor was a preclinical target that came almost from nowhere. Everybody thought it was to do with mapping the nervous system, but it's a pain mediator. And what happened is that if you have an excess of nerve growth factor in an inflammatory condition, all the nerve endings, in this case bone, start to grow enormously, and many patients have pain that's evoked by movement. So patients with a cancer pain, many patients with osteoarthritis, and maybe that's why. The areas of the body that normally shouldn't be activated by painful stimuli are. So an antibody was made to NGF, in fact a number of antibodies. One of them is called tanezumab, and it blocks the action of nerve growth factor. So this was given to 3 groups of patients. Patients with osteoarthritis, patients with cancer pain, and patients with low back pain. One single injection produced pain relief for many weeks. And as the study went on, the patients were happier and happier. Normally you have to take your tablets twice a day. Now 1 injection was working for many weeks, but a problem arose, which was that many of the patients needed their knees or their hips replaced earlier. And one of the problems is that maybe somewhere here, in one of these mechanisms, is something that's protective of the joints. But this was quite remarkable because the federal bodies in the US said we have to stop this trial, this is a side effect. The patient said we don't actually want to stop it, we want this drug again. And so the trials have recommenced, and the problem might be that many of the patients were still taking non-steroidal drugs, and maybe a combination of the antibody and the non-steroidal was the cause for this. But this was a beautiful example of a molecule that went from the basic science to the patient, and we're hoping it's going to be useful. And 2 more very briefly. In headache, there's an antibody to a chemical called CGRP that is released into the tissues of your brain. If you have a headache, it's not your brain, it's the blood vessels, it's the membranes. Antibodies to this are proving effective in headache, and ATP, which is in every single cell in the body. We require it for metabolic reasons. So damage to any cell, a bone, a muscle, skin, whatever, releases ATP, and ATP can activate pain endings as well. And there are drugs that block this coming along. So by the time many of you are practicing your professions, there are likely to be new drugs that we simply don't have at the moment. So that was tissue damage. What about neuropathic pain? Well, these are our pain fibers. C and A delta fibers convey pain. A beta fibers touch and joint position. A neuropathy is a lesion or a disease of the nervous system. And what we understand most about is the peripheral nervous system. And the most common cause of nerve damage to the periphery is a trauma, sometimes surgery, but mostly diabetes, where the changes in the vasculature cause a lesion of the nerves. So, neuropathy is a lesion or a disease. We have hyperalgesia, which is more pain than you'd expect, but you can avoid the pain. But what you can't avoid, that many of these patients have, is something pretty disastrous, allodynia, which is where touch and cooling are now painful. And we can't avoid that. We wear clothes, we have bedclothes, touch is around the whole time. And many of these patients, the gentlest touch or a cool breeze is painful. So the way in which these nerve fibers conduct has been changed. Many of the patients have numbness. They can't feel their hand or their foot, but they have pain coming from that area. And it absolutely confuses them. I can't feel my foot, but it's painful. And the reason is that the nerve fibers are disconnected, so they have numbness, but there are still some sodium channels active in those damaged fibers, conveying information into the nervous system, which is ongoing. And you've probably all heard of phantom pains, where people have a pain from an arm or a leg which has been removed, and yet the brain is still absolutely convinced that that hand or leg is still there, and there's a painful input. And it's to do with this ongoing activity. So all types of fibers can be damaged, and what happens is akin to driving with no control. So if you think about neurons, it's like driving a car. You have an accelerator, well, that's the sodium channel. You open it, you get action potentials. The impulses move. You need to block it, you need brakes, and that's the potassium channels that inhibit and hyperpolarize that nerve. So you could accelerate and brake. It's kind of not very controlled. So we have a transmission system, a gearbox in the car. It might be automatic, it might be manual, but nerves have a transmission system, calcium channels that release transmitter at the synapse. And in any model we have of nerve injury, the sodium channels upregulate the accelerator, the potassium channels downregulate, the brakes don't work, and the calcium channels upregulate as well. So if you damage a peripheral nerve, as you saw here, in the remaining nerve fibers, there's too much action potentials, too little control, and too much transmitter release. So we have drugs that block sodium channels, lidocaine, for example. But the problem is we have to inject it locally, and it's not convenient. People with diabetes, it's both their feet. Other patients with a trauma, it might be the whole arm, and you can't go around stabbing them with lidocaine 3 times a day for the rest of their lives. But John Wood, who's a colleague at University College London, went into mice and went hunting for sodium channels. And he found there are 9. And humans, we're exactly the same. So again, translation. And 1.8, 1.7, and 1.9 are all preferentially found in and around pain signaling fibers. So Lidocaine we have to inject, because if it blocks sodium channels in the brain, you're dead. If it goes into the autonomic nervous system or the heart, you're dead. So we have to deliver it locally and stop it escaping. But all of a sudden, we have 3 sodium channels that are not involved in the brain or the heart, only pain. But we've got no drugs yet. They're coming along. But remarkably, knowing about 9 sodium channels meant you could go and look in families of humans with strange pain disorders. And it turns out that 3 are due to 1.7 and 1 is due to 1.8. So these are inherited familial pain disorders. The most remarkable one is that if your 1.7 doesn't work, you feel no pain. And you might go, that's lucky. But it isn't, because the children in these families have multiple injuries. They jump off roofs, high walls, walk through fires. They haven't got pain, so they can't avoid it. And the other ones are problems because it's an increased function. So without any tissue or nerve damage, members of these families have pain simply because this pain-related sodium channel doesn't switch off or has a too low threshold. And then 1.8, another one. So we now know absolutely that these sodium channels are critical for human pain. So if we had drugs that blocked these, we could have a drug that blocked pain-related activity and left non-painful events alone. You could take a tablet or a capsule, and they work in nerve injury. They also work in osteoarthritis as well, because all pains have to get messages into the nervous system. So if we're blocking pain-related action potentials, we've got a wonderful way of controlling many sorts of pain. So since I've been in Valencia, I've had a wonderful time and I've eaten extremely well. And pain is unpleasant and pleasure is extremely nice. But there's something called molecular gastronomy, which is a kind of strange link between the two. So, here are some things we like in food. A little bit of chili pepper, cinnamon, horseradish, garlic, mint, etc. Small amounts of those are pleasant in our food. They activate what are called TRIP receptors, which are a family of sensors that first originated in the fruit fly. So I've been trying to convince you that we're all mammals, but in fact a fly was the first to evolve these channels. But why, if you take too much chili pepper, do you have this burning pain in your mouth? The reason is that capsaicin, which is the chemical in the chili pepper, activates TRPV1. And what is TRPV1? It's the human heat pain sensor. So that burning sensation from chili pepper is because this is our heat sensor. Okay, so you now have some chewing gum or you brush your teeth and you get a sensation of cooling. Mint, TRPM8, is our cold sensor. But many patients who have chemotherapy, any cold, and you saw those patients with neuropathy, cold becomes painful. So this could be a pain signal as well. And TRPA1, this is the beauty of cuisine and gastronomy. Horseradish, cinnamon, garlic, wonderful in food. But if the police get very annoyed about you and spray you with tear gas, that's very painful and it activates TRPA1. So 3 potential sensors for heat pain, cold pain, and chemical irritants. And again, I think it just shows small level activation is good, high level bad. And the fruit fly evolved these, and we have identical ones. So I'll miss that one out, and we'll go on into the nervous system. Here's the gearbox, the transmission system, transmitter release onto spinal cord neurons. And this side of the spinal cord are the calcium channels that are sitting there waiting for peripheral impulses. So these are like a little eyebrow on the surface. On this side, it's pretty big and out of control. And what's happened here is that this nerve coming in has been damaged. So peripheral neuropathy causes this huge enhancement. Remember, the sodium channels go up, the potassium channels go down, the calcium channels go up, and this is what's happened. So damage to a peripheral nerve changes the spinal cord. And we have drugs such as gabapentin that work on these calcium channels in a very complicated way. They work on a subunit, and when they bind to this subunit, the calcium channel here that allows calcium to enter for transmitter release fails to go to the membrane, it sits in the wrong place and doesn't work. So that was chance. Those drugs were made by Pfizer, and you might say, why is it called gabapentin? They made it to be an analogue of GABA, but it wasn't. The pharmacology was completely wrong, and by luck, for their pharmaceutical income, these drugs, which are first line for neuropathic pain, actually act on calcium channels. But it took the preclinical science to find out. So, in English, we have a phrase called wind up. And the idea is you can wind anybody up by saying the same repeated comment about their new hairstyle or some new clothes they've bought or whatever. But you just say the same thing to somebody on and on, they tend to get pretty annoyed. It gets a bit repetitive, you wind them up. And that's what neurons in the spinal cord do. Because if they have a repeated painful input, they switch their sensitivity from a low level to a high level. It's an intrinsic event within these neurons. So instead of responding at a low level to a peripheral input, now they're hypersensitive. All mammals do this, all invertebrates do this, and even slugs and mollusks that still live in the sea, so they are incredibly old in terms of evolution, show something similar. So a repeated stimulus means that these neurons now become responsive to non-painful and cold stimuli as if they're painful. So those patients with nerve injury who are saying touch is painful, cold is painful, I can't sleep because the bedclothes are painful, it's because of this central sensitization wind-up. And we know what it is. It can be induced in spinal cord neurons, and so the response of the neuron to the first stimulus starts to increase as that input continues and eventually ends up at an extremely high level. And this is incredibly important, because if you look at this graph here, red is what the peripheral nerve told the spinal cord. It's a low level of constant activity, just like you pinching yourself repeatedly. But if you keep going and pinch harder, your pain becomes greater. And that's what is blue. And the blue on top of the red is the message going to the thalamus and into the cortex. So a repeated painful stimulus can basically mean that a pain score of what should be 2 now becomes 8 because of this spinal event. And this is really important for patients as well, because many people with pain have a scan or an X-ray, and the doctor looks at this and says, well, I'm sorry, I think you're making this up, you're trying to get off work, you're trying to avoid your studies, there's not much wrong with your back or your knee, but you're telling me you have an enormous amount of pain. And the point is, that's exactly what they do have. But we can look at an X-ray of a knee or a back, but we can't see activity of spinal cord neurons. And really importantly, if you're going to have surgery, if you have abnormal temporal summation, abnormal wind-up, you're much more likely to have a chronic post-surgical pain than somebody else. So this is a risk factor for having a pain that doesn't go away after your surgery, a pain that continues. So that is a glutamate system, but GABA, this major inhibitory system in the spinal cord, goes completely wrong. in conditions of neuropathy. So the ion channels in the periphery have gone wrong, the major excitatory system, this wind-up, has gone wrong, and we've lost inhibition as well. So what we normally have is pain comes in through these fibers, touch is these, and the two are completely separate. Touch is touch, pain is pain. We have this central sensitization, pain is greater, and touch now evokes pain. So there's a whole change in the coding of these stimuli. And you can look in most clinical pain conditions and see evidence for exactly this. And it's a receptor for glutamate, it's the NMDA receptor, and we can block it with a drug called ketamine. Ketamine blocks the channel of this receptor. Now, this is kind of interesting as well, because ketamine is a very powerful it's an anesthetic, but at low doses, it's an analgesic, blocking this receptor. But again, any recollection, any memory of this lecture in days to come, if you can remember something, it's because of this receptor in your hippocampus. Because the NMDA receptor in your forebrain is the first step in memory. So if you block the receptor for pain, you produce cognitive effects that many patients don't like. But this drug is widely being used in two contexts. One, for controlling cancer pain, because there the most important thing for the patient and their family is to control the pain. But the other one is to give it to patients during surgery, because they're under anesthesia, side effects don't matter, and the idea is that it blocks this sensitizing effect of pain. So we're in the spinal cord, the brain has to make a decision on all of these events. And one of the key areas is the so-called limbic brain. So this is the amygdala and the hypothalamus, the old emotional part of the brain. And painful inputs arrive in these areas. The sensory pathways go to thalamus and cortex. This is the emotional brain. And one of the problems with pain is that many, many patients have what are called comorbidities. They become fearful, anxious, depressed, and they can't sleep. And that's due to painful inputs into these areas. But what we also have are nuclei, the names of which are ridiculously long, but basically these nuclei project back to the spinal cord, so-called descending controls. So we have peripheral inputs, spinal cord talking to the brain, and the brain talking to the spinal cord. And in a couple of slides' time, I'm going to tell you how you can check your descending controls yourselves, which is kind of interesting. These areas have off cells that switch pain off, and on cells that increase it. And we have noradrenaline, which through this receptor is inhibitory, and 5-HT or serotonin is often excitatory. So, again, animal circuits, we image the human brain, we see identical regions projecting to the spinal cord. And this is really important, because if you go and look in the amygdala, which is the one part of the brain that's kind of looking out on the world, and it's the area that's monitoring, is that good, is that bad, should I escape from that, should I go towards it, is it pleasant, is it unpleasant, and pain comes along and dominates the right amygdala. And it changes reward, it changes the way we look at the world. So pain patients often don't want to socialize. The things they used to find pleasant aren't. Things aren't rewarding, there's no incentive. Why should I work, why should I study? And we can see a whole range of problems such as these. So this is a European study, moderate to very severe discomfort, nearly 2/3 not sleeping, depression, anxiety. So if we treat pain properly, these disappear because pain is causing it. The patient's quality of life increases enormously. And the pathways that are controlling the spinal cord are noradrenaline and 5-HT, and I'm sure you know all anti-anxiety drugs or antidepressant drugs work on these transmitters. So we have a protective system. This could be you doing your favourite sport, and you get an injury, and you're going, okay, I'm near the end of the match, whatever you're playing, I'm going to suppress it for a while, and we can do that. Or this side, we're losing, I'm losing 3 sets to love, it's the final bit, my leg really hurts, I give up, the pain gets worse. So we have pathways enhancing pain and protecting us from pain. And it's the noradrenaline, the 5-HT. And there's a balance. So in all of us now, these two are pretty similar. But if you ever go and see an American TV series or a film about the police, there's always 2 types, good cop and bad cop. And that's almost what's happening in the brain. Good cop is the protective descending noradrenaline pathway, bad cop makes pain worse. And in preclinical science, you can look and see, and you see an increase in models of pain conditions, descending excitations, and we've lost the inhibitions. So, is it applicable to patients? So, I could set you a very short exam question here. Looks too easy. A and B, who's in pain? Well, we're all going to say B. The answer is nobody. Nobody here is in pain. But the whole brain is different. This is brain imaging. It's not applying a stimulus. It's looking at the conversations that neurons are having in the brain. And these are descending pathways, and they're just sitting there quietly doing nothing in group A. In group B, most of the emotional cortex is talking to these areas. These are normal people with no pain syndrome. These are perfectly normal people, except they suffer from migraines. But they're not having one when this was taken. So the question is then, did the migraine cause this, or were they like this to start with, which is why they suffer from migraines? And we have no idea. But it does tell us that the way in which the brain talks to good cop and bad cop can change dramatically. Now, this is how you can test this. So this is, I trained for a while in Paris, and this is a very famous French picture of 2 sisters. And no art historian has managed to explain what's going on, and it's kind of weird. And this is East End of London, more recent version. In this case, one of the sisters apparently is expecting a child. So maybe she's in childbirth, her sister is helping her. And you go, why? Because one pain can inhibit another. So we all have a mechanism in our nervous system, and this is what you can try at some point. I brought my children up, never bothering the health service in the UK, because when they were 2 or 3, they'd fall over, they'd hurt their leg, face, and I'll say, bite your finger. They go, Dad, it's gone, the pain's gone. 96% of the normal human population, one pain inhibits another. So it is a descending pathway, because in patients with a spinal cord injury, this doesn't happen. So one pain against another, and I was very young when I started this work, so we'll move on from that quickly. We know the pharmacology, because we can look at it preclinically. And it's called diffuse noxious inhibitory controls. So in a normal rat or normal human, one pain inhibits another. Block noradrenaline at the alpha-2 receptor, and it disappears. Do some minor surgery, it's back. Produce a nerve injury, it goes. And this is exactly what happens in patients. Because in patients with nerve injury, the inhibition, so conditioned pain modulation, sorry I should explain that, diffuse noxious inhibitory controls is the animal version, conditioned pain modulation is human. And it's routinely tested. You put one foot in cold water and put heat on the hand, one inhibits the other. So, in patients with diabetic neuropathy, there is many, many patients here who have lost one pain inhibiting another. In some patients, it still works. So now you take an antidepressant drug, duloxetine. Duloxetine enhances 5-HT and enhances noradrenaline. Or you take another drug, tapentadol, which is an opioid with a noradrenaline action. So the important point is, both these drugs increase noradrenaline levels, increase descending inhibition, help good cop control pain. And the presence or absence of this predicts the effect of duloxetine, and tapentadol brings this back to normal. So two drugs used in pain that work on noradrenaline, you can predict beautifully, because this is a plot of one pain against another. If you've got that, the drug has zero efficacy. If one pain can't inhibit another because your descending control has failed, the drug works better and better and better. So suddenly we can predict what's happening. And the idea is that inputs from the periphery, sensitizing the spinal cord, changing these descending pathways, we can start to think that in preclinical studies we can look at this. In a patient, we see nothing, but by using one pain against another and using central sensitization, we can start to work out mechanisms within whole patients. So in the last couple of minutes, that's what I want to talk about. So the idea is that Pain Man here, who's clearly upset a lot of individuals, he's in a bit of trouble. You know, like in England, we have these rather unpleasant meat pies. Well, he's being hit by one on the head, but I don't know. Anyway, but the idea is that the symptom and the sign, the way in which a patient describes their pain, I've got a burning pain, a pricking pain, it's mechanical, etc., that has to reflect mechanisms. So when we take groups of patients, and this has been done by German groups, neuropathic pain, there are 5 groups of patients. And we can simplify that by looking at sensory loss, remember the patients are numb, thermal hyperalgesia, where heat is more painful, and mechanical. So 3 groups of patients. There are at least 4 or 5 drugs for neuropathic pain, and the aim now is to say, these patients who will tell you, I've got a burning pain, maybe they respond to drug X, maybe these respond to drug Y, and these respond to drug Z. So instead of just having patients randomly given particular therapeutic agents, we might be able to subdivide and see that. And there's one example, the slides were slightly out of order, this is a terrible figure for which I apologize. But basically, it's a sodium channel blocker. Don't worry what it is. It's used widely in Northern Europe. But all the clinical data says when you do a clinical trial, it doesn't work. So everybody says, well, why are all these GPs in Denmark and Germany giving their patients? They say, well, it's a very cheap drug. But that's no reason. It turns out that if you have your whole population of patients, it doesn't work. But if you have patients who say, when I have touch, a non-painful stimulus, it's now painful, or cold or painful, the so-called irritable nociceptor, in those patients, the drug beats placebo beautifully. So here is an example of just all patients as a group don't respond, but ones with a particular sensory symptom, which must reflect a mechanism, start to tell you that drugs can be effective in particular patients. So I'm going to forget this bit entirely and tell you about one final little experiment for the future. So, you all know that when you have a transmitter, it binds to its receptor. So you can use a transmitter as a Trojan horse. Remember the kind of the Greek myths? Troy, the city, nobody could get in, and outside the Greeks came with a huge wooden horse, and inside the horse were all the troops. So you can take substance P, a transmitter that binds to receptors on spinal cord neurons. And as substance P binds to its receptor, the two of them move from the membrane inside the neuron. So, you take a neurotoxin, something called saporin. Saporin cannot cross any membranes. So, it might be a neurotoxin, but it doesn't do anything because it can't get in. But if you stick it onto the transmitter, the two go in. And after a month, neurons that respond to this transmitter in the spinal cord are destroyed. In patients with severe uncontrolled pain, it used to be relatively normal that surgeons would cut their spinal cord, make lesions in their brains, and just chop anything their scalpel went close to. This is killing a defined group of neurons that respond to a transmitter. And if you do that, you remove all hyperexcitability. And this is an example of taking this therapy into veterinary practice. You might see this dog's leg. It has a large cancer growing in its bone that's inoperable. It's had this treatment, it moves, it's happy, it's healthy. So this has now gone into cancer patients as a therapy for uncontrollable pain by any pharmacological or psychological means. But it's suddenly become a way of selectively targeting, it's being called molecular neurosurgery, killing one defined group of neurons and taking pain away. So pain is complicated. Hopefully you have a little kind of understanding and hopefully a bit more interest in what is going on in these mechanisms. And there's all the other side, the psychology, the physiotherapy, the physical, the psychological interventions, and we can understand that. Because those descending controls we talked about, they're activated by placebo. And I wanted to finish the idea of memory, reward, context, culture, metaphors, all these other things are really important. And this is a completely crazy experiment. So this is a local anaesthetic, it's a cream. So in children having a vaccination, for example, you just rub it on, you block the pain receptors, you give them their vaccination. And it's used in adults as well. You can take capsaicin, which is painful, and you can apply that. So EMLA is analgesic compared to placebo. But if you tell the individuals, local anaesthetic blocking the capsaicin. If you say, I'm not giving you local anaesthetic, I'm giving you a very painful compound. You give it, and instead of working like a local anaesthetic, the pain flips. So instead of being relieved, it's even worse. And when you add capsaicin on top of nocebo, it's even worse. So this is the brain. What the brain thought was going to happen, is it placebo, is it helpful, is it nocebo, is it unhelpful, completely reverses the effect of a drug that works on sodium channels out in your body and those TRPV1 systems as well. And so the brain is always in charge of all of these mechanisms, and that's the challenge to the future. And so I'd like to kind of thank my lab for giving me something to talk about. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all the work they did. I'm getting to the end, so just like my family or you guys are going, that's my lab. Thanks to them. Family going, thank goodness he's finished. Well, I can thank them. Thank you all for coming on tonight, and I hope you're happy. Thank you.